Hello, everybody. I'm just going to give you a couple of words to kind of keep you motivated. I'm going to put up a new mind walk that will go a little more into materialism and reductionism for, well, not necessarily today, but I definitely will have a second mind walk for you in the next day or two so that you can take a listen and think about that. Right now, I'm going to share, I want to really focus on something that I think is really nice about this particular set of books. Um, hold on just a second. I want to just look at the mind tap at the moment. Okay. Um, you're what I really like about this textbook in so many ways is that you are never exclusively oriented in the Anglo-American or Anglo-European American tradition, or what we call the Western tradition. There's an understanding that thinkering has been going on all over the world for a long time, and cultures with whom the Greeks and the Romans had some experience, and some cultures with whom they had no experience, were also thinking profoundly about stuff. So I just wanted to highlight today and maybe see, you might want to go and do a little research on your own. This school in India called the Carvaka school, right, of philosophers, and the Carvaka school of philosophers, it only ceased to exist about 700 years ago, but it actually was around for almost 2,000 years, right? And the Carvaka philosopher works are no longer around, as it says here. But the thing that was really cool about them is, especially in what you might call the heady metaphysical thinking that happens in India after the evolution of the Indus Valley civilizations into what we now call the Indian culture, Indian civilization, or the civilization of the subcontinent. Uh, the holy books and philosophical engagements that the Indians had been up to was highly metaphysical, compared even to China and Greece. And in one sense, highly metaphysical as both a sacred tradition and as a kind of everyday metaphysics or everyday tradition, pragmatic tradition. What the Carvakas did, and notice this time here, 600 BC. Okay, that in itself is very important. Around this time in India, this is actually when you might say what we call Hinduism today is actually being born, because what existed in India before the Carvaka school, the Jain school, which is another religion that's still practiced today, Jainism, the Buddhist teachings in schools, all around this period, about 600 to 700, there was a change in the direction of Indian thinking, because you find this to be the case in the Greek world, the Persian world, and the Chinese world, and the Egyptian world, and I suppose you'd also probably say the Hebrew or Jewish world, that at some point the people got tired of constantly being at war, got tired of constantly having to worry about, armies traipsing through their land and being, taken up into slavery or taken into servitude by invading armies. And the fact that their kings and their leaders really were getting them into these scrapes, and mostly for the purpose of the egos of their kings and leaders. So something that happened around this period And Carl Jaspers, who I've mentioned a few times in different places, he calls this period the axial age. Okay. And the axial age is a period of time that comes from about 800 BCE. Jasper says to 200 BCE. I think it can be extended out maybe to 800 BCE to 6 or 700 CE. But the major issue here is that thing I was talking about, sort of the world at war. The world was tired. The different civilizations of that period from about 800, especially from about 800 to 200 BCE, they just reached the point where they were just exhausted. It's not, universe doesn't all happen in one spot, doesn't all happen at one time, but the birth of Zoroastrianism, the birth of Jainism, the birth of Buddhism, the birth of um, Hinduism, actually, as it defines itself against Jainism and Buddhism and Carvakism. Carvakism. It's not one I use very often. They all were, in a sense, around this period of time from 800 BCE to about 500 BCE in India. They were they'd reached the point where they were tired of the Rajas, the kings, just constantly being at it. And actually, the great texts of India and Greece and China from this period first glorify war and then try to make sense of it and then try to figure out, what is the evil of war? Why is the world situated such that we're always at war? What can we do to change that? Okay, so that's all by way of preamble, saying the Carvaka school, at this time that it first develops and then it flourishes over the course of the next couple of 300 years, its major concern is, can we stop with the metaphysical speculations that are based on really not much and just pay attention to what's happening in front of us? That is, as it says, here, they see their contribution to thinkering as, and it's a very early one, actually, their contribution to thinkering is being, hey, sense perception is really the only thing that we should pay attention to, the things that we actually perceive. Because most of the stuff that people get lost in their metaphysical meanderings and contemplations are imaginatively true, imaginatively, capable of being experienced, but they're not actually being experienced in the world per se, right? So what you get with this period of time called the axial age then here is this first kind of movement toward what we would call real materialism. It's going to be doubled down a couple hundred years later in Greece. You're going to have Democritus showing up with his ideas that everything is just, atoms bumping around in the void, and that atom is just the smallest piece of matter, and all of those pieces of matter can combine together. That probably for the Carvakans would be too much speculation still. They are radical empiricists. Now, this is important for the simple reason the radical empiricist is the one who wants to get to the root of experience. So radical means root, empirical means having to do with experience. So they want to get through their radical empiricism, they want to get to the root of experience, and the root of experience, the primacy in experience is the primacy of perception. Okay. Now, this flies in the face of some thinkers like Plato, flies in the face of some thinkers like Descartes, who are like, always, you can't really trust your senses. But at the same time, they're setting out for the first time the idea that you can hold aside the things you've been told about the world and just examine your own experiences. And that's really kind of the important part of this reality and being module, is how you interpret the world based on your own experience. And I don't mean your experience of being told how the world is structured, right? Or is it based on your own experience, or is it based on what you've heard and you've just taken that for granted? And I would even include here science. You know, most people can't do very much with the science they've learned. They're partially informed, or they're poorly informed, or maybe they're generally informed, but they're not informed enough. They're not well informed. They can't take the science they've learned in schools and do very much with it. I think we're seeing a lot of the fallout of this problem of how science has been taught over the last 50 years. But the major issue is when you simply take doctrines, when you simply take ideas that have been prefabricated for you from other people, right, and you just adopt them, then you really weaken your standing in the world, because you're completely reliant on those other ideas, not the ideas that you found, not the ways that you engage the world, but how your pastor, your parents, your grandparents, your teachers have told you, right? So in me wanting to encourage you to examine the willingness to be uncertain, right, and to explore the world that you experience, I really want you to be engaged in asking yourself, how do we know what's real? How do we know the matter that makes everything up, right? How do we know if things are actually made of atoms? How do we know that the earth is going around the sun? How do we know that that things will always fall in a uniform speed, depending on whatever circumstances? How do we know all of these things? It's not that we can't. These things, I think, have been demonstrated, but what can we do to actually make this something other than just a doctrine that we've adopted in order to explain a world that we take for granted? Well, the first thing, you have to start with your perceptions, right? You have to start with your perceptions. And I really think it's an important aspect of the Carvaka that what they did was, the Carvaka said, will you just look at the world? Will you just feel things? Will you smell things? Will you hear things? Will you touch things? Right? Will you taste things? Will you simply allow all of this power you have literally at your fingertips, literally at your tongue tip, at your eye tip, at your nose tip, your ear tips? Will you just take this power you have and look at the world without using the lenses that have been put on you, touch the world without wearing the gloves that have been put on you, right? So this is, I think, it's just incredibly important. When you stop utilizing your experience to explore the world, and this begins with the primacy of perception, how you perceive, what you perceive, when you perceive, where you perceive, et cetera, et cetera. When you start to do that, you are actually creating a situation that will allow you to rethink things you've been told and never questioned, that will allow you to have an experience of what the world is in order to begin getting a handle on that for yourself, right? This is what the Carvaka have done. There are other thinkers after, in China and Greece and Europe and Africa, South America, who've said similar things, but these are among the first people to just simply say, stop the metaphysical speculations and just experience the world and follow your experience through, right? Because another thing that happens when you have inherited beliefs is that maybe you stop experiencing the world even when there's a plague coming upon your people. And rather than pay attention to what's actually happening and the experience of those who are actually suffering, you simply make some kind of dogmatic stance. This isn't real. It's not, there's a higher power behind all this that will at least, no matter how much I suffer, will allow for this to be worthwhile, et cetera, like you were Job, or like you were, one of the Indian saints or the Taoist saints of China. I'm not saying there's no God, and I'm not saying there's no divine plan. I'm not saying any of those kind of things. Those are just not things that you can have beginning with your sense perception, right? What is your sense perception of the world? And set aside what anybody's told you and just explore that experience. Okay. So again, what I really like about this textbook is that it always is saying, here's some thinking that happened in India, some thinking that happened in China, in Africa, in South America, all the places that normally don't get talked about in these kind of courses. And it lines it up with the way that we've been thinking about things for, a lot of us that are from the Western area of the world have been thinking about now also for about 2,000 or 3,000 years. And you get a chance to see sort of this back and forth. But don't let what you presuppose to be correct get in the way of your experience. Get in the way of you perceiving the world and what's happening in it. All right, I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope that that's a little bit of an encouragement that you'll find helpful. And I will be back. I'll be back soon with maybe a longer mind walk on materialism versus idealism.